Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. I want to talk about everybody's favorite topic, not just the commitments in the portal, but just portal in general, because the portal closed about 72, 96 hours ago, whatever it was. But it doesn't mean that some big names did not get in before the portal closed. And it does not mean that there is still not a lot of moves being made behind the scenes. There are a lot of teams that still need players out of that portal. And so let's go ahead and discuss some of those players and some of those teams. First name I want to discuss. This one's actually very, very interesting. So it is Coleman Hawkins, really a point forward, point center from Illinois. Averaged 12 points, 6 boards, 37% shooting from three. Kind of a program icon as a guy that's been there 4 years, was there with Ayo Dosunmu and Kofi Cockburn, stuck with it, with the program, obviously led them to the Elite Eight this past year. Well, if you listen to this show, you know that right before the portal closed, Coleman Hawkins, who has graduated from Illinois, who has entered the NBA draft, he threw his name in the transfer portal right before it closed. And at that moment, it caused this great fervor. And then he kind of put out a tweet where he just said, he pulled the old Aaron Rodgers, RELAX, relax. And he basically said, listen, I'm only doing this to protect all my options. Something could happen. I could get hurt. There could be a situation in the pro draft process. And so because of it, I'm just weighing all my options. And so if you listen to that statement, if you listen to this show, I said, look, that doesn't sound like a kid that's coming back to college. It just sounds like a kid that is protecting every possible thing that could happen in this process. Well, I bring it up and why I'm leading with Coleman Hawkins. I think it was Friday. He did an interview with Jeff Goodman, Field of 68. Really good stuff. I listened to it the other day. And if you listen to the interview, I think it makes it clear that he's maybe a little bit more open to potentially actually transferring out of Illinois. Actually, let me even put it back. Let me change that. He actually makes it sound like it's more likely that he could return to college, period, and that he could leave Illinois, which was very surprising to me. If you had asked me before I listened to that interview, I would have guessed it was 95.5 that he even returns back to college. And then if he does, he's just going to come back to Illinois. And if you listen to that interview, sounds like not only is he probably not coming back to Illinois, but that if he does come back, it's going to be a wide open and very interesting recruitment. If you listen to the interview, basically this is what he said. And I'm not saying don't go listen to the interview. The Field 68 guys did a really good job getting that interview. So I'm not saying don't listen to the interview. But I bring it up because if you listen to the interview, he says a couple things stand out. One, he basically said, look, I'm probably not going back to Illinois. And it's not that I don't love the school. It's not that I don't love Brad Underwood. And it's not that I don't think he's a great coach. But what he basically said was, look, they recruited an entire roster assuming I'm not back. And so it's not really fair to the guys that were brought in behind me for me to now be there and take up minutes from guys that are trying to develop, trying to get their own opportunity. So it does not sound like he's going back to Illinois. He did mention, I'm not staying in the Big Ten. If I ever come back to college, I'm a guy that respects rivalries, tradition, history. And so you're not going to see me at a Michigan or Purdue or Indiana or whatever. Missouri's obviously an out-of-conference rivalry, so you're not going to see me at Missouri. So I found that interesting as well. So Big Ten's off the table. Now, honestly, if he came back, it would be kind of an NIL situation. I don't see the scenario where really anybody in the Big Ten has the NIL money to compete, except maybe Indiana, but I think they've spent all their money. Ohio State, maybe. Illinois probably has the best NIL outside of Indiana in that conference. So Big Ten doesn't make sense. But I just bring it up because you listen to the interview. Sounds like he could, down the road, depending on how these draft workouts go, could return coming back to college basketball. Now, what does that mean? Where would he go? Listen, I think it'd be total speculation on my point, and I don't think it's fair because I don't think at this point he is really looking at that possibility. Sounds like his full focus is on the NBA draft. I believe the deadline to withdraw is May 29th. So my guess is he takes the next 2.5, 3 weeks, spends as much time as he can looking at his options, looking at the possibilities. And then from there, if he knows, hey, I'm not going to get drafted, or I'm not going to get drafted where I want, maybe college is an option, I think it's probably another 2 weeks before you hear any sort of possibility of him returning to college basketball. But that interview was interesting because it certainly opened up the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he could be returning to college. And if he does, it sounds like it's going to be a much more open recruitment than I think I thought, and I think a lot of others as well. Let's get to some of the other big names in the portal. In addition to Coleman Hawkins, let's hit on a couple other ones. Kadary Richmond, you can see him on the old thumbnail if you're watching on YouTube here. Kadary Richmond, really, really, really good guard. 6'5", 6'6", kind of a big guard, kind of the same kind of size and frame of like a Tristan Newton who played at UConn. Averaged 16, 7, and 5 this past year at Seton Hall. Well, right before the portal deadline, he entered the transfer portal. Now, why is it interesting? One, he has not committed yet. It is May 5th. It is Cinco de Mayo as I'm recording here. Again, this stuff's always subject to change. It's about 6:30 Eastern time. Maybe something does change. But I bring it up because I think when he entered, there were a lot of people that, in my opinion, believed this was a done deal. Like, don't even recruit him. He's going somewhere else. And where everybody thought he was going was honestly to St. John's. There was an interview that Mike Rapoli, kind of their big time booster, did. Mike Rapoli, who's the vitamin water guy, where he basically said, yeah, we're putting together our roster and we got a guy from Seton Hall coming. And everybody knew it was Kadary Richmond. Well, here we are about 6, 7, 8 days after he entered the portal. He has not committed to Seton Hall. And so what's interesting is a few things. One, St. John's appears to be aggressively going after other guards in the portal. Davion Smith, who we've talked about, was being recruited by Kentucky, among others, before they got the Lamont Butler commitment. Davion Smith was on a visit to St. John's earlier this week. I saw some buzz that there are some crystal balls from the 24/7 Sports that basically are saying they think he is going to St. John's. I heard that there is a very good possibility that he is going to St. John's. This was the kid, we've talked about him, 6-foot point guard, 13 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists per game as a 6-foot guard. I like him. I certainly like Kadari Richmond more. But if you think you're St. John's and you're not sure if you're going to get him, then you got to take your chances somewhere else. Obviously, where it becomes interesting, if Kadari Richmond is not going to St. John's, that becomes a fascinating recruitment. The only school that I can think of that sort of would make sense there is Arkansas. Arkansas, obviously, they got John L. Davis last week. They have Boogie Fland. But the one thing they don't really have is a lead guard, is a point guard. And so you wonder, can they get in the mix? They certainly have the NIL money. Kadari Richmond might be the best player in the portal since it entered. Again, 16 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists from a 6'6" guard. He's kind of got that NBA size, NBA frame. Basically, if he could hit a three-pointer, that's a kid that probably is in the NBA right now and probably doesn't need 4 years of college to get there. So keep an eye on him. This recruitment is very, very, very interesting. It has gone very quiet over the last couple days. I don't know what's going on. My hunch is that if anybody's going to take him from St. John's, it's Arkansas. If I had to guess, I'd still probably say St. John's, but this felt like a done deal about 5-6 days ago when he entered the portal, and now it is much, much, much more wide open. A couple other names. I mentioned it's gone very quiet on Kadari Richmond. It's gone very quiet on 2 former Kentucky Wildcats. The first one is DJ Wagner. DJ Wagner to me is fascinating. I have talked about and made sense of and explained to all of you why I think he's a better player than he's being given credit for. I know he was the number 1 high school player in America. I know he didn't have a great year at Kentucky, but we've talked about it quite a bit. He was great early. Then he got hurt. He came back. Rob Dillingham and Reed Shepherd were playing better. He was kind of the guy that was getting a lot of the blame. Why aren't they playing more? Why are you starting DJ? From everyone I've talked to around Kentucky, he was a great teammate. He took it in stride. He didn't ask to be a starter, whatever. Well, I bring it up because he hits the portal, and there's a couple interesting things. Remember, the NBA draft deadline was last week. He did not enter the NBA draft. So unless he's going overseas or something, he's playing college basketball next year. But what's also interesting is there's just not a lot of tangible information on him right now. He took a visit to USC last weekend, did not commit. Doesn't appear, at least publicly, that he took a visit this weekend. So does he know where he's going to go? Is he taking his time? He's kind of one of those players. Like, I don't think he's got to rush the process. Again, I still think with the ties to Kenny Payne, his grandfather played college basketball with Kenny Payne, and with his ties to John Calipari, I would still assume it's Arkansas. If it's Arkansas, that would obviously take Kadary Richmond off the table. And I don't know, maybe that's the holdup. Like maybe Arkansas is going after Kadary Richmond because they're not sure on DJ. Maybe DJ isn't sure because there's some Kadary Richmond smoke. But I still think that's the one spot to me that Arkansas desperately needs, not desperately, but probably needs a guy. You don't want to go in the year with Boogie Fland as your point guard, as your lead guard. John L. Davis, I think, is better playing off the ball. So I like what John Calipari has done. Still some work to do at Arkansas. Speaking of former Kentucky Wildcats, Adou Theiro, very, very, very interesting story there. This was a kid, was on campus last week at Arkansas, and it seemed like it was a done deal. First off, he was an interesting one because he entered the portal right after the season, and it seemed like there was some frustration with Calipari, how he was used, this and that. And I think if Calipari had stayed at Kentucky, there was kind of a belief early, there's no way he's coming back. Then after a couple days, cooler heads prevail. You say, okay, he could come back to Kentucky. Then Calipari leaves. You start to try to figure out, okay, who could potentially follow him to Arkansas? Adou was not on that list early, but you could see those fences starting to mend. You could see the idea that Calipari was taking his recruitment seriously. Him and Chin Coleman flew up to Pittsburgh to spend time with him. He's from Pittsburgh originally. And so with Adou Theiro, I don't know what's going on because he visited Arkansas last week. I think everybody largely thought it was a done deal. And then next thing you know, he leaves without committing. We all thought he was going to commit. He doesn't commit. What does it mean? What's going on? This and that, the other thing. And, I think we're all just kind of waiting on him. North Carolina, by the way, I didn't really talk about the impact at Carolina with no Cliff Omoyori. I meant to, and I kind of just forgot. I kind of skipped it over in the notes. But I just bring it up because I think they're looking for one more big guy. Now, I think they want more of a traditional like 5, and Adou's kind of a 4. So we'll see if North Carolina can get in the mix. We'll see if somebody else can get in the mix. But Adou Theiro, it's a very, very weird transfer because, again, it just felt like this one was done to Arkansas until it wasn't. And now we wait and see. Couple other names. Listen, I would be remiss if I didn't do this show without answering questions about a guy that I have gotten a million freaking questions on, okay? Jaxson Robinson, the leading scorer at BYU. So Jaxson Robinson, leading scorer at BYU. This is a kid that has entered the NBA draft, but by the way, this year at BYU, worth mentioning, by the way, started his career in the SEC, played a year at Texas A&M. Transferred to Arkansas, had moments at Arkansas, but it clearly didn't click. Goes to BYU, is good as a junior, was really good this past year, 14 points per game, 35% three-point shooting, 6'7", wing, star guard, whatever. Since last week, I have been asked at least probably 20 times via DMs, Instagram, Twitter, ats, whatever. Torres, what's going on with this kid? Is he going to commit to us? What is taking so? What I would say is a couple things. One, he is very much in the NBA draft process. I get the sense that he's taking it very seriously. I think obviously with the combine coming up, it's kind of a wait and see mode as far as how many workouts are you going to get, all that good stuff. And so why I find it interesting is that, one, he was invited to the NBA draft combine. That is a few weeks from now. And so my guess is, first of all, it's not even my guess. If you're invited to the NBA draft combine, just know you are, in the eyes of the NBA, a draftable player. Now, to be clear, draftable means a lot of different things, right? It means you could be a superstar. You could be last year, Brandon Miller, this, that, the other thing. Who's going to go? You could be a Reed Shepherd. You get invited, You might go, you might meet with teams, you might do some measurements, you might do some physical stuff, but you're not going to play 5-on-5. Then there's the next group of guys that basically there's no guarantee that they're going to get drafted or they're trying to move up in the draft process. And that's more of a Jaxson Robinson. So I just bring it up because the NBA draft combine is next week. It actually starts a week from today, May 12th through 19th. And if you're in the NBA draft combine, you are following through on that process and you are going to see if it helps your draft stock. And so in my opinion, with Jaxson Robinson, what I would just say is it's just going to be a wait and see for Kentucky fans. I just think you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to see. I do think if he comes back to college, it's going to be at Kentucky. That's the one thing I'll say. That's the guy Kentucky fans I know you want. There really aren't a lot of star type players left. I do think a guy that just averaged 14 points per game on 35% shooting from three, that's probably the closest thing that you have left to a star in the transfer portal right now. So Jaxson Robinson, my guess is by the end of the NBA draft combine, he's going to know, am I really a draftable guy? Am I going to go where I want to go? Or am I not going to go where I want to go? And if I'm coming back to college, it probably should be for the guy that I played for in Mark Pope. And I think it would end up being Kentucky. By the way, another interesting name that entered the portal right before the deadline we did not talk about last week, Caleb Lohner, transfer from Baylor. Why is that important, though? Forward, began his career at BYU, actually played 2 pretty good years at BYU. And I'll be blunt, I don't know all the details of why he transferred, but transferred to Baylor, numbers go down, playing time goes down, stats go down. And so after 2 years at Baylor, he's like, I'm out of here. And I do think that it feels to me like this is a kid that could end up at Kentucky with Mark Pope. Good player. He'd be like a backup 4. You have your backup 5 in Brandon Garrison. You have your starting 4 with some of the guys that you brought in Andrew Carr. And he's kind of that mold. He's 6'8". He can hit threes. He's not a great 3-point shooter, but he's good enough. He's tough. He's physical. He plays well. I have no super insight into that recruitment, but my guess is that it does feel like with him entering the portal, that it could be a Kentucky commitment. Again, he's probably an 8th, 9th guy, but he's the kind of guy that Kentucky fans have lacked. A veteran, or Kentucky has lacked. Veteran role player can be that kind of player for them. So we'll see what happens there. Only other name in the portal that I have not discussed that I want to really quick, Norchad Omier. He played at Miami the last 2 years, double-double machine. Started his career at Arkansas State. We did talk a little bit about him last week. Very interesting story. He's actually from Nicaragua, looking to become the first ever person from Nicaragua to play in the NBA. 2 years at Miami, 17-10 at Miami, enters the portal right before the deadline. And let me just say, there are a lot of reports about some of the NIL asks. I think it has scared off some teams. I think Kentucky was like, no, thank you. I think Arkansas was like, listen, we got a lot of money, but we ain't giving you that much. Even St. John's, I think, is like, we'd rather just roll with the guys that we have in the program right now. It's a luxury item that would be nice, but we don't know that we need it. And so all the buzz I'm hearing right now is Baylor on Norchad Omier. Really good player, 17-10, a little bit of a 3-point shooter, but clearly enters the portal looking for a big payday. 5th-year senior, can't really blame him. Not yet an NBA draft prospect. He's probably the last big name that I have not mentioned.